Welcome to Into the Verse, the podcast where we dive deep into the verses to share new and unexpected insights into the holiday you thought you knew. You've probably heard an explanation or two about the symbolism of the Arba Minim, the four species including the lulav and etrog. I know I have, and honestly, none of these explanations have ever really felt convincing to me. Well, last Sukkot, we released some really exciting research from Ami Silver, one of the scholars here at Aleph Beta, on the Arba Minim. What set it apart from everything else I've heard was that Ami looked deeply into the words of the Torah itself when it describes the four species, to try to understand what the Torah wants us to learn from this commandment. The result? The best explanation of the Arba Minim, and really the whole holiday of Sukkot, that I have heard to date. And to make it even better, there's now a beautiful animated version of this piece on alephbeta.org. You can find the link in the show notes. This episode really resonated with our listeners too, so we decided to share it with you again this year. And we'll be back soon with some brand new material for Parshat Bereshit. Now here's Ami Silver in conversation with Imu Shalev.
So, Imu, before we dive into any text, I'm going to kind of just ask you some holiday trivia.
Okay.
The three festivals, right, for Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, there's a special kind of description of what that day is. So, for example, Pesach is called Zman
Cherutenu, time of our freedom. Mm-hmm.
Time of our freedom and liberation. Totally makes sense for Pesach to be Zman Cherutenu. What's Shavuot called in the festival prayers? Remember?
Zman Matan Toratenu. Shavuot, the holiday of Torah giving, totally makes sense. Pesach, Freedom Day. Shavuot, Torah Day. And Sukkot is, this is where you're going, right?
Sukkot is?
It's Zman Simchasenu.
Zman Simchatenu. The time of our
happiness.
Now, why is that? With Pesach and Shavuot, not only did they make sense, but it's the essential identity of that holiday. The whole holiday of Pesach is about celebrating the liberation from Egypt. The whole holiday of Shavuot is dedicated to, celebrating the day that the Torah is given. And Sukkot, it's the time of our happiness. Well, maybe the rabbis didn't have a good thing to call Sukkot, so they gave it a generic thing.
Right.
Simchatenu. It's a holiday. It's a joyous time. Okay, but I don't buy that. And Sukkot actually has quite a lot of particularity about it as a holiday. And now what's interesting is that if we look in the Torah's description of Sukkot, we actually do find an element of joy in it. What is the joy associated with Sukkot? Why might Sukkot be this particular time of joy? And I think actually the kind of joy that we encounter there, or the quality of that joy, has the potential to raise some really interesting directions for us here. And I want to start by looking at actually the first place that the holiday of Sukkot appears in the Torah. This is in Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, where we got introduced to a lot of the holidays for the first time. It says the following: Ach b'chamisha asar yom lechodesh hashvi'i. But on the 15th day of the 7th month, be'ospechem et tfuat haaretz tachogu et chag Hashem shivat yamim. When you gather the harvest of the land, you will celebrate God's holiday for 7 days. Vayom harishon Shabbaton, uvayom hashmini Shabbaton. The first day will be a Shabbaton, a kind of festival observance day, and the 8th day will be Shabbaton, a festival observance day. So this is the first thing we hear about what's happening on this holiday. It's the holiday that's happening when you're gathering your harvest and you're celebrating for 7 days. Let's go to the next verse. And on the first day, you'll take for yourselves pri eitz hadar, a fruit from an eitz hadar. Word hadar, what do you make of that word?
Pretty. It's a pretty tree, a beautiful tree.
A fruit from a beautiful tree. Kapot tmarim, palm fronds. Va'anaf eitz avot, and the branch of an eitz avot. Avot means thick. Ve'arvei nachal, and river willows. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem shivat yamim, and you shall rejoice before Hashem your God 7 days.
There's that word, simcha.
There's that word, simcha, right. And the next verse has explained that it's because we sat in these Sukkot when we left Egypt, and we will remember that for all time. So this is the descriptor about the holiday of Sukkot.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the joy on Sukkot? What's the joy about on Sukkot?
It's unclear what you're joying, but the simcha part, if you're asking me to pay attention to the rejoicing, it seems to come in the middle of this list of laws, right? It's telling you, hey, in the 15th, you got to keep this holiday, Sukkot. You got to grab a bunch of weird plants. And then you could read it in two ways. You can say, grab a bunch of weird plants, period. Also, you should be really happy on this holiday. Or a way of reading it that I think would be appropriate would be somehow one of the laws of Sukkot is to gather these weird plants, and through these weird plants, I'm calling them weird just because I think that the idea of this is kind of funny, but take these plants and be happy with God. Somehow the plants are a vehicle for being happy before God.
Right. And, you're talking about, I think you said gather the weird plants, but the funny thing here is that actually in the previous verse, there's actually a lot of plant gathering happening, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're totally right.
We're in an agrarian society.
Yeah.
This is Harvest Festival.
Yeah.
This is a big deal.
That actually makes far more sense. It's the Jewish version of Thanksgiving. Right? Everybody get all of the last harvests, take the gourds and the pumpkins and your bounty and your cornucopia, and have a major feast, a celebration, happiness. But that's not where the happiness command is.
Right. And that's the thing. If you were writing this, then you should make me an edit here. You should take out that phrase, Usmachtem Lifnei Hashem, rejoicing before God, and you should put it up at the end of the previous verse. It should be, when you gather all the crops of the year, gather them in at this time of year, and rejoice before God for 7 days with all of your bounty. But here we have this very strange thing. Gather in all your harvest at this time of year, period. Go take for yourself this fruit from this tree, these palm fronds, some branch, make sure it's thick, and then river willows.
Right.
Oh, and then usmachtem. And when you do that, wow, are you going to be happy?
Right. It's actually funny. Like if I were to show up to, my mom's Thanksgiving, and everyone potluck, my sister brought like the yams with the delicious marshmallows on top, and another brother, bring some potatoes, and I bring the thick branch and the river willows. And I'm like, the joy is here, everybody.
Party doesn't start till Limu comes with those branches in his hands.
Exactly.
Right? Then everyone's just going to get up and dance for 7 days straight. They would just be so gripped with ecstasy, right? So granted, this is weird. Associating rejoicing before God with what we call the four species, the Arba Minim, seems out of place. And if we even just take a step back, it really is a very weird part of this holiday anyway. If someone were to stop you walking down the street with your Arba Minim and say like, hey, what are you holding in your hand? Like, what is that? What would you even say to them?
Right. This is my ritual bouquet.
Right, a ritual bouquet. Oh, and what do you do? Oh, we shake it. Why these plants? I don't know. But you know what? The Torah is telling us these plants somehow are connected with some kind of joy.
Yep. I think what you're getting at is such an elementary, basic question that I think I'm almost afraid to go there. I'm almost afraid to ask it, right? Because I'm like, it's such a good question. You better have a really good answer for me. Because, right, I think many people have waxed poetic on what is the meaning behind Arba Minim, that no one really expects a very good answer.
Well, I'd say that a lot of the explanations that are given tend to be very, almost like metaphorical. It's the four kinds of Jews, it's the four letters of God's name, it's 4 parts of the body. That's
not a very common explanation we give to our mitzvot in general. So it is somewhat rare, I think, in Jewish practice to have very esoteric, spiritual answers. Not that they're invalid. It's just if you're looking for a rooted, concrete, shot-driven answer, it's a great question. I don't know.
Because the Torah is very insistent and specific. Torah is like, this kind of fruit, these kind of plant parts. This is what you get. And it doesn't tell us why. So what are the Arba Minim? What is this mitzvah? And what does it have to do with
what does it do with simcha,
with joy?
Yeah.
I actually want to zero in with you on the pasuk about the arba minim, the description of the four species. It seems to be quite random and coming out of nowhere. Take this fruit, take that thing, do these things. I want to start with really asking ourselves a question when we read these words carefully. Is this really coming out of nowhere? Is this really existing in a vacuum, this mitzvah? Do these words evoke anything for us when we hear them and listen to them sensitively?
Cool.
So let's start with the beginning of that verse again. Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon pri eitz hadar. The basic mitzvah here, take for yourself a fruit from a tree. Think about those words, lakachtem pri eitz, specifically with the phrase lakach, to take, taking a fruit from a tree. Does that phrase, that idea remind you of anything?
Maybe the first taking from a fruit is Chava, is Eve taking from the tree of knowledge. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And if we turn to Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, let's just look at what it says. Vatere ha'isha, the woman, this is Eve, saw, ki tov ha'etz lema'achal, v'chi ta'avahu le'inayim, that it's good for eating, it's desirous for the eyes, v'nechmad ha'etz lahaskil, it is
pleasant to contemplate.
Now look at this phrase, vatikach mipirio, vatochal, and she took from its fruit, and she ate it. So in fact, the first taking of a fruit, it's happening here when Eve took the fruit from the tree of knowledge.
Interesting.
And now you might say, okay, whatever, taking a fruit, that's how you get fruit off of trees. Maybe it's not so wild or interesting that when we have a mitzvah having to do with fruits, we're obviously told to take it, because how else do you get a fruit off of a tree? But let me ask you something. Looking at this verse in Genesis, what was it about this tree, this fruit, that made Eve want to take it?
Seems like three things. She saw Vatera ha'isha kito. It was good. Good to eat. Ta'avahu la'inayim. It was a desire for the eyes. So maybe it was hadar. Maybe it was beautiful.
It seems like something about the way it looked, like she couldn't take her eyes off it and she couldn't keep herself away from it. But isn't it interesting now that when we come back to Parshat Emor, ulakachtem, and you shall take, pre-eitz, not just any fruit from any tree, but pre-eitz hadar, the fruit from the tree that's beautiful. The beauty of it is actually its only identifying feature here. That seems to be exactly what was going on back there in the garden.
Fascinating.
And I don't want us to stop there, okay? Lakachtem pre-eitz hadar. You take the fruit, right? And you take all of these other things. And what did we say happens?
Usmachtem.
Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. You rejoice before Hashem your God. What happened after Eve took from that fruit, from that tree, and she and Adam ate it? What happened after
Interesting.
that?
I think I see where you're going. Almost the exact opposite of happy. The polar opposite of happy is sad. So one of the curses that God gives woman is etzev, sadness.
Harba arbe itzvonech beheronech be'etzev tildi banim, some kind of sadness that's going to be involved in pregnancy and childbearing. And by the way, it's not only to the woman, but in the next verse, God turns to Adam and says, because you did this, arura adama bavurecha, the earth will be cursed on your behalf. Be'itzavon tochlena ko yemei chayecha. You're going to experience sadness in eating the produce of the earth. So a consequence of this taking from this beautiful tree was that both of them would experience forms of sadness.
Sadness in the realm of fruit, right? So in as much as women, right, bear fruit, right? We even say pru or revu, it's the same word, as pru, right? You should be fruitful and multiply. And man's toil, his sadness is going to come from his labor in the fruit of the earth.
Reaping fruits is going to be sad.
Yeah. So that makes me think that on this Sukkot holiday, or this harvest holiday, where the harvest is finishing up, somehow we're reconfronting this sin which brought us great sadness in our fruits, is going to bring us great joy and happiness. This is really cool, Ami. What else you got?
It does seem like something's going on there, right? I got one more thing for you. When we look at Sukkot, right? where is this joy taking place? Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem.
Uh-huh.
Very literally before the face of God. Let's go back a little bit closer to the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve ate from the fruit.
Mhm.
God comes out. They hear God's voice walking in the garden. And what do? Vayitchabe ha'adam v'ishto mipnei Hashem Elokim.
Oh my gosh.
Adam and his wife hide mipnei, from the face of Hashem Elokim.
Wow.
That same double form of God's name. In Sukkot, you take the fruit, you do the 4 species, you have joy lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, before the face of God. At the tree of knowledge, they took and ate from that tree, and then they hid mipnei, from the face of Hashem Elokim, of Hashem the God. We're seeing 2 instances of taking fruit from a beautiful tree or a beautiful fruit, and look at where it leads. In the garden, it leads to sadness and to hiding from God. And in Leviticus and Sukkot, it leads to joy before God, in God's presence.
But no eating.
Right. We see all these things that seem to be shared elements. And what you're noticing here is a key difference. A key difference is what is done with the fruit. In the garden, it was eaten. It was eaten illicitly. And that was the cause of the breakdown afterwards. On Sukkot, it's commanded to take it, and there's no mention of eating, and we're obviously not eating it. And we're rejoicing with it. Now, there's actually one other key difference between these 2 instances in terms of not only what you do with the thing that you take, but on Sukkot, what are you in fact taking? You're not just taking a fruit, right?
Oh, right. Yeah. You're taking some other vegetation.
You're taking a bunch of other things. And it really makes me wonder, does that have something to do with the element of joy before God rather than a kind of sadness in hiding from God? Here's where the stories diverge. Take but don't eat, and take it together with these 3 other things. Can those be the elements that actually make it a very different experience?
So it's fascinating, because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, this is all really intriguing, but Ami's avoiding this kapot marim anafet tzavot ba'alei nachal.
Which would be convenient, right? Because what in the world is it?
Right. And I was thinking, I'm like, kapot marim, were there kapot marim in Eden? Anafet tzavot in Eden, right? Where is he going with this? But now you're specifically saying those elements, the lulav, the hadassim, and aravos, whereas the Torah calls them the kapot marim, the anafet tzavot, the arvei nachal. Those 3 are new. They somehow maybe are part of the distinctions from the Eden experience, right? There was eating in Eden, no eating here. There was sadness in Eden, there'll be joy here. And there's a bunch of new other elements that get taken with this fruit.
Somehow this is just take these things and usmach them, as if like you will almost automatically just be filled with happiness and joy on Sukkot. Like, why? Holding these things? Is it possible that if we can try to understand a little more like what these 4 species really are about, we might understand how they hold a kind of secret to joy? So come back with me to Vayikra 23, and let's look again at this verse. And what I want you to do as we read this is I want us to kind of encounter each of these plants, each of the 4 species, as if we've never encountered it before. The Torah is telling us about different elements of the plant world. And that's what I want us to kind of focus on here. So number 1 is pretty simple. Ulakachtem lechem, first thing you take, pri eitz hadar. What part of a tree are you taking here, Imo?
The fruit.
Pretty simple, right? The first of the 4 species, first element of this mitzvah, take a fruit. The next one, kapot tmarim. Now, what are kapot tmarim?
Oh, that's fascinating. So kapot are palm fronds. They're the leaves of a tree.
I love that you identified it as a leaf, because if you ask somebody what a lulav is, they wouldn't think a lulav is a leaf, but it really is. A lulav, I live here in Yerushalayim. There's palm trees out in my courtyard here. At the top of the palm tree, when you have a new leaf growing out, what we call a frond, before it opens up into that kind of canopy and hangs off the side, it just stands up as a lulav, as a thick, closed spear, so to speak.
Right.
And if you let it grow, the individual slats on the lulav, they open up and they are the leaves of the palm tree.
Right.
So when the Torah is telling us kapot tmarim, it's saying, take a leaf. And let's continue on to the next step. Va'anaf eitz avot. What did we say this translates to? Just in a very simple way.
The branch of a very thick tree. Oh, interesting. So we went from fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From fruit to leaf to branch.
Yeah. We seem to be taking different elements of the tree as the different elements of this mitzvah.
And getting further from the fruit.
You move from the fruit and you find the leaf, and then, but don't stop at leaf, go take a branch. Ima, what's the next thing we do in this mitzvah? The arvei nachal. What is the unique characteristic of this type of plant?
The willow tree, maybe that it grows from rivers.
The specificity of this part of the mitzvah is that it's a thing that grows on water.
Mm.
Arvei nachal is the plants that are growing up from the water.
Mm-hmm. So you see this as progression where you're like, we got the fruits, we got the leaves, we got branches, and in some sense, we even got trunks. The branch is a stand-in for the tree itself, right? Because it's
Get something woody. Yeah.
Right? The arvei nachal. And now you've gone even further to
And
the source of the tree, which is water.
So let's just think for a moment what it might mean to hold this in my hands. As a mitzvah, I'm holding a fruit. What comes before the fruit? Oh, there's a leaf. Oh, and then I took a leaf, and if I keep going into the process, I'm going to find a branch. I'm going to find the body of a tree. But where does a tree come from? The source of that tree is water. And when I'm holding these 4 different kinds of parts of plant life in my hands, I'm holding the whole process of plant life together from water to fruit.
Mm-hmm. It's actually a product and source with all of its in-betweens.
It's telling you the whole story. And let me ask you something. We're noticing here that it seems like each element of the 4 species is kind of a further step toward the source of where these things come from.
Mm-hmm.
What's the source of the water, Imu? Look at what comes next in the pasuk. I'm just going to read the pasuk now, keeping in mind the progression we've just uncovered. Take for yourselves Pri Eitz Hadar, the fruit of this tree, Kapot Tmarim, the leaves, Anaf Eitz Avot, the branch, Arvei Nachal, the willows on the river, Usmachtem, and rejoice, Lifnei Hashem Elokechem.
Right there, you go straight to the source.
You go straight to the source. It almost reads, you will be rejoicing, you'll be in God's presence.
Right.
You're going to meet the Creator if you follow this process.
Right.
Back to its source of its source, you're going to be right there in God's presence. Rejoicing.
Beautiful. I'm smiling as you teach me this. Like experiencing a fruit and where it comes from and seeing its source, and then taking that source all the way to God reminds me of just, I found it to be a very spiritual experience to take my kids to a farm or to pick fruits, because especially in modern times, right, when our fruits essentially grow in the supermarket, it almost feels artificial, like weirdly, to see a pumpkin on the vine or to see a peach on a tree and be like, oh, like in those commercials.
That is an intense reality of disconnect from source. Right? We don't identify things from their source.
Right.
We get them after the fact.
And there's intense joy. There's something thrilling and exciting. Right? If you ever grow vegetables in your backyard, it's almost hilarious that the earth gives you fruit. It just, it gives you fruit. It gives you like candy. So to bundle that experience together and to really just, meditate on it or just, be moved by it. Maybe that's why I haven't had this experience in my ritual Judaism up until now, as I didn't really know what I was doing. But to stare at those 4 things in your hands, 4 things that kind of tell you the source of your bounty and connect you as far back as we can, back to water, back to God. There's great joy in that.
And this is part of what's beautiful about the process here in this mitzvah. It doesn't say, think about these things. You're literally holding them in your hands. As much as possible, you're fully sensing each of these stages of the creative process. You kind of brought up a good question. Is usmachtem sort of then you shall do the happy thing?
Mm-hmm.
Or is usmachtem a natural outgrowth
Mm-hmm.
of what happens when you hold these four species?
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that if I'm holding this with the awareness that I'm encountering very directly and viscerally this very fundamental creative energy that runs through creation, and I'm holding it in my hands, and it sounds like I have no choice but to encounter the source of all of this when I kind of take stock of it. And then it kind of brings up the question, which is, this is called joy, this experience. It's called simcha. What is the cause of that simcha? What kind of simcha is that exactly? So I want to go back to what we first started with. Because when we read the descriptions of Sukkot and it's saying, gather in your crops, it's a harvest festival.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thinking to ourselves, that would make sense to us for it to be a time of simcha. Because, yeah, you got all this great food. But the Torah sort of throws a curveball here. Then go outside. Take this, take that, take that, take that, and find your joy here. What is that joy? It made you smile. What is that? What are we sensing when we're kind of recognizing this process up close and recognizing God as the source of it?
The word that's coming to mind is matana, is gift. It seems like the Torah is telling you to go beyond mere enjoyment of the harvest, right? The harvest was hard work, I imagine. You're disconnecting the fruit from its source. So when the ritual asks you to go beyond merely bringing the bounty back to the table and eating it, and it tells you, remember where this came from, it seems to be that a source of the joy is that this was given to you, right? That this is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think in the I'm scolding you kind of way of like, remember where this came from.
Mm-hmm.
You never would have done this
Mm-hmm.
without me. But in that same hilarious notion that if you have a garden, it gives you blueberries, right?
Mm-hmm.
In some sense, maybe right, in the basic metaphor of the Garden of Eden, at one point in human history, life was a garden and you could eat from all the fruits. You could just pick to your heart's content.
So I want to come back to that point and pick up on that in a moment. You said the word that comes is like matana, or the gifted nature of what we've received and how this world works. The other thing that comes to mind for me is a sense of connection. Like when I hold these species with that kind of recognition of both the creative process itself, the life of a plant, and just how kind of marvelous that is, and recognizing that this is all coming from the source of all, from God. I think part of that is that we're able to kind of feel in a very fundamental way, I am connected to this universe and I'm connected to the creator.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that. And I think that's also wise that gifts are wonderful because something is given to you and is ready for you, but also gifts imply a giver and the relationship and that connection come together.
But I want to now come back to another thing you mentioned, because you said, it's like once upon a time, God's world was a garden where you could just take and eat. And that's almost true. That's partially true. But let's go back to some of the contrasts that we noticed earlier, right? What was happening back in the garden when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge? If the mitzvah of Arba Minim seems to involve taking a fruit and opening up a full recognition of the source of this fruit and our relationship with that source, well, how was that dynamic playing out back when Eve saw that beautiful fruit on that one tree? God basically said, you can eat all the fruits in this whole garden, eat to your heart's content, but there's one tree, Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, that you may not eat from. Right? And here I kind of want to bring in some of Rabbi Foreman's teaching on this, that the fundamental message there is take everything you want from this world, but recognize that there is a creator to the garden, because Dat Tov V'Ra is the creator's domain. And if you can respect and acknowledge the creator's domain, you can really eat and enjoy from everything in the world, because you're recognizing that all of it is coming from that source.
So what you're saying, and the way Rabbi Foreman likes to say this, is God gave the world as a gift to Adam and Eve, and he made it so that they don't have to walk around and say thank you all the time or perform thank you sacrifices. he kind of made a default state of thank you, a default state of connection and admission by creating a tree that they can't eat from, right? It's almost like the recognition tree. As long as you don't eat from the tree, but you eat from all the other trees, you're perpetually in this process of connection, recognition, and thanks to God, because you're staying away from the master's tree.
It kind of creates a fundamental lens through which you see everything else.
Right. The moment Eve thinks, hey, that tree looks great to eat, then that framework dissolves. And the respect and the admission and the appreciation, understanding where this garden comes from, that all fizzles away.
Right. In a sense, Adam and Eve had to kind of forcibly ignore or force themselves to forget the creator to eat from that tree.
Right.
And you know what the consequences are? If this is how you want to take fruit in this world, it's going to be in disconnect from me. It's going to be in distance from me. It's going to be without joy. And it's going to be ultimately out of my garden.
It's going to be with sadness.
It's going to be with sadness. Adam's curse, Eve's curse, the sadness of reaping the fruits of this world, childbearing and literally eating. Come to harvest time, you're eating the fruits of the land. As we've seen, the element of simcha, it doesn't appear right there when you're harvesting all of your crop. It's only appearing now that you've collected all of the 4 arba minim and that you're kind of developing this awareness of source and of connection and that giftedness, and all of this is coming from God. And this is what animates my life and enlivens the world I live in. What happens now when you go into your kitchen or into your storehouse and you start eating the fruit that you took from your harvest? All of a sudden, everything you've gathered, everything you've toiled for, it takes on a different quality.
Totally.
That harvest now isn't a fruit that's disconnected from its source. That harvest now is every potato and every apple and every tomato is enjoying and tasting the fruit that God has gifted you.
And when you eat the fruit from the mega store, the produce doesn't taste nearly the same as if you buy from the farmer's market or if you buy at the farm, right? And I think that's true chemically, but I also think it's true psychologically, spiritually. There's something terribly sad and colorless about Adam and Eve, who in their desire for the fruit severed it from its source. So maybe they get to enjoy some fruit, but it's totally severed from a major source of its happiness, which is fruit in relationship, right? In relationship to the leaf, to the branch, the tree, to the water, and to its ultimate source, God.
And God is kind of giving us this mitzvah that sounds so similar to the very first mitzvah that was violated. It sounds so similar. Like, why would God be telling us to do the first thing people didn't do right? But it sounds as if in some wild way, God is saying, okay, you know what? You are fruit eaters in this world. You are cultivators in this world. You are creators in this world. I want to invite you to be able to take the harvest that you've grown, but I want you to eat it like you're in my garden. I want you to be able to come take the fruit and taste it and know where it comes from. The arba minim are actually what bring us the awareness of what has truly animated this process, what's truly responsible for this fruit that I've gathered and harvested. It's not just, my tractor and my toil and my hard work that I put in. The Creator makes this life-giving process happen all the time and is giving that to us. In a sense, the arba minim are what make me aware
It's like this umbilical
of where
cord.
all of this comes from.
Yeah.
So then my harvest can be truly a divine joy. Without the arba minim, I worked hard and doggone it, I'm going to enjoy my food and just eat and drink and be merry for 7 days. And then you know what? Then I'm hitting the field on day 9 and just going back to work and breaking my back for another year. So I can then enjoy a week of it a year from now. That's not the joy the Torah is talking about. The joy the Torah is talking about has to do with fully receiving the blessing from God. And the gateway to that actually is the arba minim, because it's the arba minim that let us sense that in its fullness. Then I go back and I eat my crops and I taste that in my crops and I identify the food I'm eating as this bracha, as this divine gift.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Beautiful concept.
So I want us to revisit kind of just this element of joy of Sukkot, right? And happiness. Well, these other holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, they're identified as like kind of the core essence of liberation, the essence of giving of Torah, what would it mean if Sukkot is somehow cluing us into the essence of joy, to a kind of fundamental quality of what Simcha is? It seems to be clear that what it's not counting the potatoes in your barrel. It's not merely the joy or gratification of how well your investments did at the end of the year. Dafka, specifically when we're at the time of all the ingathering, we're being commanded to take the things that, as you pointed out, we're not going to be eating, and to hold them so that they can allow us to experience a different kind of joy, that joy of recognition of Creator and our connection with God. What if Sukkot is the time of year where we are centering our kind of spiritual work and our religious practice around tapping into that kind of essential joy, for it to be able to kind of teach us a little bit like, what could it be like to live joyously?
Yeah, I don't think Sukkot is the only time to be happy. It's sort of that time to remind yourself how happiness is fostered, because it's this time of bounty.
You've filled your storehouses with your harvest. Now go find out where joy comes from. Hold the 4 species and wave them around in joy. And go eat. Have a blast for the next week. But not simply because of the pears that you've collected, but because of that recognition of your relationship with your source, with the Creator of all.
This episode was recorded by Ami Silver together with Imu Shalev. When this episode originally aired in Aleph Beta, it was edited by Ami Silver. This episode was produced for Into the Verse by Sarah Penso and Tikva Hecht. Our audio editor is Hilary Gutman. Our managing producer is Adina Blaustein. Our senior editor is me, Ari Levison. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for the start of another amazing cycle through the Torah. We have some really great stuff in store, but until then, from all of us at Aleph Beta, wishing you a wonderful Sukkot.